Okay, so today we're talking about fueling for endurance sports, specifically longer distance events. Um, this can be translated into shorter things as well, but the main premise here is long distance events. The takeaways for today that I want you guys to really think about is that nothing that we're talking about today fits into really any one category. The information and guidelines that I'm presenting should be kind of used as a starting point. So if you're unsure of how to really get into dialing in your nutrition for whatever race or event you're doing, these are great starting points. So you can take the information and once you start there, find what works for you and personalize your own nutrition plan. Don't worry about kind of the minutia detail of it. It's really about just trying to get you started off on the right foot. And then secondly, that we're not really looking into any limiting factors here that may be food allergies or pre-existing conditions. So if you have any questions about that, or you want to learn more about that, you want to contact a registered dietitian, sports dietitian, or sports nutrition professional, because I just have basic background knowledge here. They have a lot more of that. It can help you kind of with their sources for today's presentation are kind of a litany of different websites and papers and podcasts and things like that. So feel free to check all these out there. They should be all free. The one I really like to I spend a lot of time listening to is the trainerroad.com is a great source. They have a podcast they put out once a week, and they have all their sources online, and you can go and read any of the papers that they use to present their information. Really good, really fun to listen to. It's very cycling focused, but they do present a lot of information for triathletes as well. So get into it. Little background as we just to kind of set the scene. Talking about kind of anatomy and physiology recap from high school here. So ATP is the adenosine triphosphate, the direct source of energy for muscles, working muscles, as you're going through workouts and training and racing, things like that. The three major energy systems that replenish ATP are creatine phosphate, anaerobic glycolysis, and oxidative phosphorylation. So a lot of fun words, but basically what it means is that you have energy systems that replenish your energy quickly, and you have in certain energy systems that replenish it slowly over a longer period of time. So the first one, creatine phosphate, is very quick. We're talking 5 to 10 seconds. So think of like a maximal sprint. And for that, you don't really need any fueling. It's just whatever's in your body at the time. Again, 5 to 10 seconds. The anaerobic glycolysis is the second quickest. Really only lasts for about 1 to 2 minutes. Again, near maximal, submaximal efforts. A little bit longer sprints, 400-meter sprints, bike sprints, in swimming, 200-meter, that kind of thing. But the energy system we're really focusing on today is the oxidative phosphorylation. So this is your aerobic system, and this lasts for a long time, hours and hours, and that's kind of what our center focus is today. The fuel for working out and training and racing is what gives you the energy to do all those things. So three main sources of fuel for the body is carbohydrate, fat, and protein. The main one we're going to be focusing on today is carbohydrate, just because it's the most readily available source during working out, during events. Fat and protein do have their place, typically more in the post-workout realm, and we're going to cover that a little bit, but the main focus is on carbohydrate, obviously. When you're looking at carbohydrate, fat, and protein, they have a certain amount of energy per gram, which is measured in kilocalories. So carbohydrates have 4 kilocalories per gram. Protein has also 4 kilocalories per gram. Fat has 9 kilocalories per gram, and the one that we don't use because our muscle cells can't directly use it for energy is alcohol, which also has 7 kilocalories per gram. but it's not directly used, so we don't really need to cover it. The carbohydrates, like we said before, the most readily available energy source, especially during long aerobic events, triathlon, running, cycling, swimming, stuff like that. The carbohydrate gets converted into glucose, which is immediate energy for working muscles. It goes right into your bloodstream and it's right there, so your body can uptake that and use it for energy. Anything that's not used, so let's say you're finished with a workout, we'll go into this later, but you finish with a workout and you're just trying to replenish your glycogen stores, the glucose that doesn't get used gets converted back into glycogen, which stores in the muscles and the liver to be used later for the next workout, something like that. Carbohydrates. So, like we said before, hold on, got all screwed up. Okay, carbohydrates. As we go, through this, you'll see there's just so many different types that we're going to focus on, but the main three types of carbohydrate that you're going to see and that you're going to want to focus on are sugars, starches, and fiber. Starches are broken down into glucose by enzymes in the intestine for absorption. Later on, we're going to talk about absorption rates and how that kind of gets influenced by things like pre-race nerves and how much time has passed since you ate. But that's just one little bit there. Fiber is another source of carbohydrate that plays a big role in endurance events because it actually can't be broken down by the body. We don't have the enzymes to break it down. It still plays a vital role in your overall health, obviously, especially in the gut. But there's certain rules surrounding fiber, such as like we don't want to take a lot of it pre-workout or during the workout because we can't absorb it, so it's just going to sit there in your stomach and it's not going to feel great. We have nutrient-rich carbohydrates, which fall into two categories: complex and simple. Complex carbohydrates typically take longer to absorb. You're looking at fruits, veggies, grains, beans, milk, nuts, things like that, which are all super important and super healthy and good for you, but depending on what you're trying to achieve here with your fueling plan, maybe not necessarily the best thing for fueling a longer workout. And then you have your simple carbohydrates, things like maple syrup, sugar, jellies and jams, honey, all that. Those are immediate sources of glucose that can get broken down super easily, super quickly, and great sources of energy for working out and doing working out and longer races and training blocks. Keeps screwing up. Okay, there you go. Before we go to that one, general recommendations. Again, I'm going to kind of throw in these general things here just so you have a starting point. For just kind of your everyday athlete, you're looking at about 5 grams per kilogram of body weight per day is the general recommended amount of carbohydrate. This is going to change depending on how much your body is, how much carbohydrate your body needs for your working out, your training, your racing, whatever you're doing. The higher you go in intensity or duration of your training or your racing, the more carbohydrate you're going to want to consume. So typically the higher level athletes are recommended to eat about 7 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight per day. That can be a lot for some people. It's certainly a lot if you're getting towards the higher end of that, around 10 grams. And it can be hard to actually eat that much. Even though your body may need it, you just might not physically be able to eat that depending on who you are. So again, you're looking at a recommendation and a range here, but you just got to kind of figure out what works for you and what's the best way to fuel your body for what you're doing. Again, recommended to stick to the 7 to 10 if you're completing really hard, intense either workouts or races multiple days in a row. And the reason we do that is because post-workout, our muscles are depleted of that glycogen, and we want to try and refuel those stores back up. So if you're only intaking around 5 grams per kilogram of body weight per day, and you're completing multiple days of hard training, you might not be replenishing those stores, which means you're not going to have energy for the next day's workouts, and you're going to probably not do as well as you would have if you had given yourself a lot more of that carbohydrate and that energy. There have been some studies to show as well that an increase in fitness can increase the amount of glycogen your muscles can store. So you basically, what that means is as you get fitter, you can actually store more energy in your muscles, which gives you more energy later on when you're racing and completing hard training cycles. Now we're going to kind of go into when we want to be taking in the fuel, what we want to be taking in for fuel, and why we're taking it in. We're going to kind of split it up between, if you want to say like solid food and liquid. Hydration will be a little bit later on, but in general, we're just looking at kind of how much carbohydrate and when we want to take it in, what we want to take in, and why we're doing it. Pre-workout. So this could be before a long training day, a long race, anything along those lines is kind of what this is falling under. As a general rule, we want to kind of shoot for 3 to 4 hours before our workout / race to be eating our pre-race or pre-workout meal. This is, again, just general, but it's what most studies have shown to be the best window of our opportunity to take in your carbohydrate and have your body absorb it so it's readily available once you start working out, start racing, start training. The meal should be high in carbohydrate, moderate in protein, and pretty low in fat. The reasons, again, that we're doing this is because we're trying to fuel our body for the work that we're asking it to do, and the carbohydrate is going to be the quickest form of energy here. If we fill up our body with lots of protein and lots of fat, again, depending on the type of athlete you are, if you're more of a keto focused athlete, maybe that's going to be perfect for you. But since again we're focusing on carbohydrate, we want to steer away from those, which are going to fill up the stomach and not allow us to take up as much carbohydrate as our body needs. Another good general rule of thumb here is, as the closer you get to your workout, the less you want to eat, obviously. But in general, if you're, let's say, 2 hours before a workout, you want to shoot for about 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. And again, if we get closer, you're looking at about an hour before, you really only want to be taking in 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. This is just to help kind of with absorption. If you're eating too much before and then you're asking your body to do a lot of work, you're not going to absorb it as much. You're going to get gut distress, all those things that we'll go into later. Not fun. Another quick tip, as we get closer to the workouts, moving from more solid food to liquid food or fuel, and moving from solid food to like a liquid hydration diet with carbohydrate in it will be a lot better for your gut health and your gut in general as you're working out. One of the things that we use to help kind of decide on what to fuel our workout is what we call the glycemic index. So what this does is it measures the glycemic response of your blood glucose concentration and the insulin that your body secretes to uptake that glucose in relation to what you're eating, essentially. So the higher glycemic index number, well, let's say it like this, the higher GI food, there's basically high, medium, and low here. The higher ones are what's going to spike your blood sugar and insulin. So things like, again, sugar, maple syrup, honey, all those things. You're shooting for taking those in during or immediately post workout. The reason is because your body absorbs it quickly and it's readily available a lot sooner. That means that if you're during the workout, you don't have to worry about waiting for that to pass through your bloodstream and intestines and get absorbed. It's going to go right there. Same thing post-workout. You want to get that sugar in right away to replenish the glycogen stores. So that's why those would be great. The medium and low GI foods, things like whole wheat bread and potato and other starches, are not as quick to release the sugar. So you're looking at to take these in part of, like what we talked about before, that pre-workout meal. What it does is it actually releases it over a slower over a longer period of time. If you're eating these before the workout in the 3 to 4 hours, right as you start working out post meal, that energy is just coming into your bloodstream and turning in, giving you that energy. That's why we're shooting for those 3 to 4 hours before. During the workout. So during the workout, again, widely accepted absorption rate of around 60 to 90 grams of per hour of carbohydrate is one widely accepted rate. I won't say theory, because it's kind of ever changing. So that's kind of where you want to aim for when you're starting out, and then based off of how you feel during your workouts, you can kind of adjust either up or down from there. One thing that we're not going to talk about as much, but still good to bring up, is stop and go sports. So basketball, hockey, soccer, things like that usually require less carbohydrate during the activity that they're doing, whether it's a game or practice. But taking in carbohydrate in the form of liquid or solid, whatever it is, can help stabilize blood sugar and kind of reduce the perception of fatigue. So even if it's not doing a whole ton to provide the energy, just because of the type of activity you're doing, it may just make you feel better while you're working out, because you're taking some sugar, and that's always going to give you energy and make you feel a little bit better. The reason we shoot for that 60 to 90 is because carbohydrate is readily absorbed at a rate of around 0.8 to 1 gram per minute. So if you're looking at that over the whole hour, 60 to 90 is kind of that sweet spot. The limiting factor in the amount of carbohydrate you can absorb is the rate of intestinal absorption. And this is going to change person to person, obviously. But depending on how your body reacts to your intestines react to the amount of carbohydrate you're taking in, is going to dictate how much you personally can actually absorb per hour. Less carbohydrate, less than 60, you may not be feeling enough. Over 90, you may be feeling too much, and you're kind of getting into the GI stress, the gastrointestinal distress area, which is never fun to be in. One of the newer studies that have come out show athletes possibly being able to absorb up to 140 grams per hour of carbohydrate. That's a lot. So you're looking at a high-level athlete in terms of that amount. Tour de France riders, professional triathletes, long course professional triathletes. Those type of athletes their bodies are conditioned to be able to work at a very, very high capacity, and to be able to do that, they have to intake so much more fuel than just kind of the normal athlete. Again, it's possible that you could sustain that amount of carbohydrate. You just have to try it out and see. So again, 60 to 90 is the sweet spot. You're looking at the higher level athletes being able to absorb probably a little bit more, if not a lot more than that. What works for you is going to depend on practicing and seeing how it goes for your body. One of the things that really helps with the absorption of carbohydrate is taking in different forms. So what we're talking about here is typically the two main sources are glucose and fructose. The most of your nutritional gels and bars and things like that will have a mixture of glucose to fructose. The original studies showed that a ratio of about 2 to 1 of glucose to fructose is kind of the happy medium there. And the reason that they're doing this, putting this into their products, is because glucose gets absorbed directly into the bloodstream, whereas fructose kind of diverts, and it has to go to the liver first, which gets converted into glucose, then released into the bloodstream. The thinking behind this is that you have, instead of just kind of overriding your whole system with all this fuel, the glucose gets absorbed right away. The fructose kind of comes in a little bit later, and spread out over a little bit longer period of time. Therefore, the absorption is a little bit easier on your intestines and on your stomach. One of the main factors in absorption of glucose during workouts is the intensity of your workout. So anything from a recovery jog up and down the street to a 3-hour marathon is going to dictate really how well your body is going to absorb the carbohydrate and how much it's going to absorb. So during higher levels of intensity, blood will be shunted away from the GI tract to the working muscles, your legs, your heart, your arms, your upper body, everything. And that results in a lower absorption rate in the intestines. One study in 1990 found that if you're exercising at about 70% of maximal oxygen consumption, which is what we call VO2 max, it actually reduces blood flow to the GI tract by 60 to 70%. And then more intense exercise, so over VO2 max, actually can cause reductions in excess of 80%. And that was by Baska, Moses, and Duster in 1990. So again, it's kind of descending scale, where the more intense exercise you're doing, the less your body's going to be able to absorb. You may need that carbohydrate because you're working out so hard, but your body's not going to be able to take it up. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but dehydration also plays a role. In a study done by Rare, Jansen, Browns et al., 80% of runners who lost at least 4% of their body weight from fluid loss during exercise experienced lower GI symptoms. So lower meaning the lower half of the body. So you're looking at dehydration as well. And again, we'll talk about that later on, but all these things in conjunction can lead to a decrease in your ability to perform at your high level. So what we kind of want to take away from this is that it's super important to practice your nutrition during training. And I don't like to say, practice during a race, because you're typically there to perform at your best. But you have to, after the race, you have to take a kind of a step back and say, okay, how did that feel? Did it work the way I wanted it to? Was I able to hit my nutrition goals? And kind of, look through it and see what could be changed, what could be better, and how you can make it better for the next race. Adjustments can be made here and there. One of the main ones you want to think about that I experienced a lot and didn't realize what it was at first until too late was pre-race nerves, and just the overall stress of the competition that you're preparing for. I have a very nervous stomach, especially pre-race, like the morning of, and I didn't really realize that's what that was for a long time. And so I had a specific nutrition goal. I worked with a nutritionist for my Ironman to set up, make sure I was, fully covered and eating the right things and drinking the right amount and all that. And I was eating this very large amount of food. I think it was 5 hours before the race, drinking lots of liquid, and it just really ruined my racing. I just had terrible stomach problems throughout the races, and I didn't really realize what that was until later on, and I was able to step back and go, well, this was recommended to me by a sports dietitian, but it's really not working. I just kind of took it as gospel, and we never really accounted, and not their fault, obviously, but never took into account that maybe the day of the race, I'm really not able to absorb as much just because I'm so nervous. So you have to be able to kind of compartmentalize that and think about the different aspects of your nutrition and how things like pre-race nerves are going to affect that. And then the other thing to remember is, just like your performance, your body, the ability of your body to perform on a given day, you're going to have off days. So there's going to be days where you feel great, your training went perfectly, your taper went perfectly, but you just have a really crappy nutritional day. You take in too much, you don't take in enough. And that might throw off your whole race, but it's going to happen. So it doesn't mean that one bad race nutritionally is, throw in the towel and start over. It might mean that just, that was the day and that sucked. But if it happens repeatedly over time, then you kind of want to take a step back and look at your fueling and make adjustments. Also, don't be afraid to experiment on the whole wide spectrum of nutritional training here. So like we said before, we have kind of general guidelines, but you might fall on one end or the other. You can take in a lot of fuel or you can't take in a lot, which is kind of like my case. So don't be afraid to experiment both ways. So as we go into post-workout, this is a really important point, especially if you're doing multiple days back-to-back of training, or if you have a stage race in cycling, you have stage races, or you're doing a relay race, something like that. The post-workout nutrition cannot be neglected. We are looking to repair the muscle damage, refuel our glycogen stores. All those things are really important to be able to be at your best the next day. Your muscle cells are more permeable to glucose post-workout, so that's why we're trying to get the fuel in right away. What we call the golden hour, which is preferably within the hour since you stop working out. It's not a steadfast rule, so exactly 60 minutes goes by and you've lost every hope of being able to replenish your glycogen stores. That's not true. Again, it's going to change person to person, but typically within the hour is when you want to get most of your fuel in. There was a study done by Gentens and Jukendrup. I'm going to butcher that, but in 2012, their study showed that there was a rapid rise in muscle glycogen synthesis 30 to 60 minutes post what they call glycogen depleting exercise, which is basically endurance sports. This was due in part to an increase in permeability of the muscle membrane to glucose. So that's kind of why we're shooting for that 30 to 60 minute post-exercise window. It also showed that when carbohydrate ingestion is delayed by several hours, it may lead to up to a 50% lower rate of muscle glycogen synthesis. So if you are depriving your body of that post-workout nutrition, there's a chance that your glycogen stores won't be able to be replenished anywhere near what it would be if you're able to get that fuel in post-workout within the hour. There was a symposium review done by Fuchs, Gonzalez, and Van Loon that showed when rapid recovery from prolonged exercise is a key objective and maximal performance is required within 24 hours. It's advised to consume more than 1 gram per kilogram of 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body mass, starting as soon as possible after exercise. And then, so as soon meaning around that 60-minute window. And then after that, within frequent intervals, roughly 15 to 30 minutes post. And what that's going to do is replenish those glycogen stores at a much quicker rate because your cells, like we talked about, are more permeable to glucose within that 60 minutes. And so you're able to get all that in there and restore your glycogen levels for the next day. Fructose was also co-ingested, and it showed to benefit the lower GI discomfort in terms of reducing the distress there, and it actually accelerated liver glycogen synthesis rates. So remember, your liver is another source of glycogen, so that's also helpful. Like we talked about before, high glycemic index foods, sugar, white bread, gels, things like that are all great post-workout. This is also a good plug for if you like to, like me, sometimes pig out on what we call unhealthy food. It's totally fine here to smash 10 cookies, get a pint of Ben & Jerry's, whatever, because yeah, it might not be healthy overall, but if it makes you feel good and makes you happy, go for it. And you're actually doing your body a service because you're taking in all that sugar, and it's going to be used to restore the lost sugar that you had. Here we'll talk about a little bit of protein. Obviously, we know protein helps with muscle repair and growth, and there's umpteenth studies online about this, but obviously consuming it in conjunction with carbohydrate utilizes insulin, which, if you remember, helps uptake our glucose in our body. While primarily metabolizing carbohydrate, insulin also stimulates the uptake of amino acids or protein into muscle cells. So that's why you'll see those chocolate milk ads, because there's protein and carbohydrate involved in the chocolate milk. So it's a great post-workout drink. Here we'll go into hydration. So hydration, again, is another form of fueling, but it's also important to keep up our hydration status as endurance athletes. Humans are around 40 to 70% water. So obviously keeping those levels keeping those levels at the correct amount helps to maintain what we call homeostasis, which is our body's natural functioning levels. So in usual conditions, just hanging around, not working out, not doing anything, homeostasis is obviously pretty easy to maintain. The body regulates itself by either increasing or decreasing thirst, and increasing or decreasing urine output. So, if your body feels like it's a little bit dehydrated, it's going to increase your thirst response, so you'll go drink some water. If you're overly hydrated and you have to pee, then perfect, great, means you're at probably a good spot. This falls into the difficult category, if you will, is when we start exercising. So exercising challenges homeostasis. During exercise, the body's trying to maintain water and electrolyte balance, and the body's regulatory systems get overloaded. And it's not, depending on what you're doing, it's not able to keep up with the amount of water loss that's happening. Sweating is the biggest factor here in terms of fluid balance. There's other fluid loss rates, such as breathing, non-sweating skin loss, just regular non-sweat skin loss, and excretion. All these are forms of water loss in the body, but when we're specifically talking about exercise and long distance events, sweating is kind of the biggest factor here. So you hear a lot about electrolytes. Electrolytes are very important for the body. Electrolytes, are electrically charged particles that are either negative or positive. Just a little aside, but you can look into that whole thing if you want. What they do is they help regulate the fluid balance between the cells of the body and the fluid outside of the cells. So outside the cell, you're thinking blood or interstitial fluid, things like that. The normal electrolyte levels allow your body to absorb and use fluid. So when your body's in a natural balance and you're taking in water, it helps to absorb that so your body can actually use it for normal bodily functions. The loss from sweating results in a higher concentration of sodium in the bloodstream. So the water will move from the cells into the bloodstream to help kind of regain that balance. According to Dunford et al., was that many athletes who exercise in hot conditions will lose 1 to 2 liters of water per hour via sweat. That roughly equates to 4 to 8 cups, if you want to kind of visualize that. And again, that's pretty general, but most athletes in a hot environment will lose 4 to 8 cups of water per hour in their sweat. When we're looking at electrolyte balance, so how do we keep the body working at a normal rate? The loss of the sodium, also salt, in sweat is your biggest factor here. Sodium is an electrolyte, so that's why and it's the most readily lost electrolytes, so that's why we talk about it a lot when we're talking about electrolytes. One of the things that you deal with when you're thinking about electrolyte balance and sodium loss is heat cramps, and one of the big things that we throw in there, not to be confused with exercise associated muscle cramping. So heat cramps have to do with a large amount of sodium lost when exercise in hot conditions or just in general. Exercise associated muscle cramps, we still don't really know why it's happening. Most of the previous thinking was that it had to do with electrolytes such as loss of potassium and sodium and all that. But what they're really showing, most of the studies are showing that it's really non-conclusive. That's why I haven't specifically been able to link a certain study. But most of the more recent data is showing that it's more due to changes in the nervous system, and the way your brain is affected by the different losses of sweat and sodium and salt and all that, as opposed to just being due to loss in hydration. Other electrolytes that are lost when you're working out and exercising hard is potassium. This is usually a lot smaller amount than most people think. Chloride and phosphorus. All of these are really easily absorbed and readily available in just normal food. So salt is again readily available and absorbed, but these are lost in such a small amount compared to the sodium that it's not as big of a deal, and you can easily replace them just by eating a normal, kind of healthy meal. So what do we want to choose? I almost never recommend plain water to an athlete, other than to rinse out your mouth, or to just kind of change what you're drinking, make it a little different. But I will never recommend it as the sole hydration source. I've been in races before where I just am, my body, my mouth and my palate is just overloaded with sugar and gels and liquid and stuff like that. So I'll take a swig of water, but I'm not using that as my sole energy because there is no energy in water. So there's really no point, because your body is losing energy while you're racing and training at a crazy rate, and water is just going to take up room in your stomach, and but it doesn't really provide you with anything other than the hydration. So this is where we can kind of double dip, because you're able to hydrate yourself with the liquid, but then you're also getting the energy from whatever carbohydrate source you're choosing. What you want to choose depends on intensity and duration of exercise. So how long am I going for? How hard am I going for? Something like a little jog around the block and you're a little bit thirsty, water would be fine, because you're not going to be depleting your glycogen stores doing that. Environmental conditions, is it hot, is it cool, kind of like we talked about before. Your timing of the intake of the hydration, are you just taking this in pre-workout? Are you going to be taking in during the workout? And then what do we want to take in after we work out? Composition of the beverage, this is again going to be more dependent on your body, how your body absorbs carbohydrate, and how it responds depending on how fat or how intense and how long you're going for. GI tolerance, gastrointestinal tolerance, is again depending on the makeup of whatever you're deciding to use, and does your body respond to that or doesn't it? And that's all individual preference. So what works for one person doesn't always work for the other. So some starting points here for the hydration. Pre-workout, we're aiming to 5 to 7 milliliters of fluid per kilogram of body weight in the 4 hours before. This is all going to depend on how hydrated you are when you start your hydration status anyway. So if you're reasonably well hydrated and you start taking in that amount, you'll probably be perfectly fine. If you're not fully hydrated, the American College of Sports Medicine, as a general rule, says that you want to consume another 3 to 5 milliliters per kilogram 2 hours before the workout, and that will kind of get you a little bit more kick-started as you get going into your whatever exercise you're doing. During the the workout, the race, whatever we're talking about here, one of the goals that I want you to think about is avoiding overconsumption of liquid. The reason that we don't want to overconsume is because we don't want to get into that GI distress that I was talking about earlier. You're aiming to replace, depending on the factors like we talked about with weather and things like that, you're aiming to replace 80 to 90% of the fluids that you're losing. So that's where you get into the sweat rate, and you figure out what is my sweat rate, and going off of that number. Same thing with sodium. Sodium needs, you're looking to aim at replacing 50 to 60% of that sodium loss. The reason that we are shooting for these percentages is that it's near impossible with the amount of work your body is doing to replace 100% of all those things. That would be perfect and great and ideal. That's not going to happen. Even if you tried to, you probably would end up just keeling over on the side of the road just because your stomach would be so full. So these are the percentages that typically work for most people. And again, they're going to fluctuate depending on who you are. The other two goals you want to kind of aim for is, like we said, avoiding gastrointestinal distress, and then basically consuming carbohydrate as needed. So you might be somebody that tolerates fluid with lots of carbohydrate in it, or you need a lot less. Like I've said before, I almost always recommend taking in some form of carbohydrate with your hydration, because at least you get doubled up. But if your body can't really handle that very well, that's totally fine. Like we said before, trying to avoid more than 2% loss of body weight per from liquid loss. That again is a great starting point. There's actually been some studies that show competitors losing up to 10% of their body weight over the course of a race. That study was done on marathoners, high-level elite professional marathoners, and they were still able to complete the race in very, very fast times. It wasn't like they were hobbling towards the end of the finish line. They were, running a perfect race in some cases. But they showed a 10% loss in body weight just from loss of fluid. So it is possible to compete at a high level, but it's not a great idea. You need to be very in tune with your body and have a lot of practice before you know exactly what you can manage over the course of a race before you get to that level. Again, with your liquid, ingesting carbohydrates, also all the electrolytes that we talked about before, sodium, potassium, things like that are, again, it's a great way to double dip and get your nutrition in, as well as keeping your hydration up. And when we're looking at hydration, typical water bottle is going to be anywhere from like 20 to 24 ounces. That's what you want to kind of aim for. A lot of hydration recommendations are based off of this. So shooting for something in that range is a good idea. And then post-workout. So again, like we talked about, really important to focus in on your post-workout, especially if you have more racing to do or more training to do. And the starting points here are replacing the lost body water. You want to try to get back up to the level of a normal state, whatever we were pre-workout. You want to try to get back to that same level. Another goal is to replace the lost electrolytes, because it's really important, obviously, to maintain your fluid balance and get your body back to that homeostasis we were talking about. Also here, avoiding GI upset, because if you start intaking too much hydration, then and you make yourself feel bad and your stomach's just full and not feeling great, you're not gonna be able to take in the rest of the fuel that you need to. So we don't want to get to that point. Consuming carbohydrate along with the hydration is, like I said before, a great way to double dip and get your glycogen stores back up. And then consuming protein as protein shake or whatever helps to repair the muscles and going forward into the next day's workouts. Mild dehydration can be reversed with a normal intake of food and beverage, so you don't really have to shoot for anything super high. Rapid rehydration recommendations, though, are about 1.5 liters, so about 6 cups per kilogram of body weight lost. So if you come back from a workout, or you finish a race and you're just totally depleted and super dehydrated, then you're trying to aim for 1.5 liters, or about 6 cups of liquid per kilogram of body weight lost. That would be the best recommendation to come back up to that normal state of hydration. Now that we're coming to the end of this, we're we've gone through the hydration, we've gone through the nutrition, the solid nutrition, fueling plans. One of my favorite quotes that I've heard from as a professional cyclist was, "Give the body what it needs so it can do what you're asking it to do." I love this quote because you can't expect your body to perform at its best if you're not giving it the fuel that it needs, essentially. If you are going out for an hour run and you haven't properly hydrated, you haven't properly fueled, you can't expect your body to reach the level that you want it to. So you can't be mad at yourself when you're not able to hit the splits that you want or the time that you want. You need to be able to plan a few days before and get all of your nutritional and hydration status set so that your body can do what you're asking it to do. Practice, practice, practice is one of the biggest tips I can give. You want to try different things in a totally different set of conditions at different times. See how your body reacts. See how your body uptakes the fuel. You want to change the duration of the timing of when you're eating when you're eating and drinking. You want to try it in different conditions: hot, cold, humid, dry, and different intensities. Really hard leg smashing workout versus a recovery workout. Again, like we said at the beginning, don't be afraid to experiment. So the general rules and guidelines that I've kind of laid out here are a great place to start, but you may find you're on one end of the spectrum or the other. You may find that you can't intake a lot of solid fuel, but you can pound 3 bottles of water or hydration mix. And that's great, because now you know, okay, I need to focus more on being able to either uptake more solid fuel, or I'm just going to stick with the liquid fuel. You can also be somebody who just can't perform very well with lots of food in their stomach, and that's kind of like where I am. So I know that if I have a big race coming up, I need to plan a couple days in advance and make sure I'm taking in tons of food, tons of hydration, so that I can reach that race day ready to go. And I may lose a little bit over the course of the race, but I've properly prepared, so my body still responds quite well. And again, when we stated in the beginning, if you're really at a loss, having a hard time with it, or you have something like a food allergy or some other sort of pre-existing condition, it's great to seek out professional advice from a nutritionist, especially a sports dietitian, because they have a lot of they specialize in this area, so they'll have a lot of good ideas for you and a lot of good tips to help you kind of get where you want to be. And the last thing I'll say is that this whole presentation is ever changing. The whole food landscape is ever changing. So what might be a good recommendation today is totally debunked in a year from now. Or something that we talked about today might be a different recommendation a month from now. You never know. So you just got to kind of keep up with the studies and the different rules that are being put out there, and just kind of be aware of those changes. And again, what works for one person doesn't always work for the other. So you can take these studies with a grain of salt, because you can always adjust as needed. Yeah.